Hello, very good day to you. Welcome to the latest Met Office Deep Dive. I'm Alex Burkill. Thank you for joining me, whether or not you're a regular Deep Dive viewer or if this is your first time. Thank you so much. Welcome along. I'm going to be talking for the next 20 minutes or so about the weather that's been and the weather that's coming. Remember, as always, you can hit the like button so that we know that you're appreciating the content we're putting out. Hit the subscribe and then you'll stay up to date with all the videos we're pushing out across our YouTube channel. And don't forget to leave a comment as well. We do read the comments. I will be looking through them later and I will be replying to some, and we'd love to hear your constructive feedback on what you'd like to see, what you'd like to see more of, so do leave a comment. Now, one thing I will point out at the start, this video was actually recorded on Monday. The main reason being my wife is heavily pregnant, so we're not too sure when I'm going to disappear for a little while, and we didn't want you to be without a deep dive this week, so we've recorded it a day early. Now, if you see me on the app on the website in any of our videos on Tuesday presenting them, then you'll know that the baby hasn't come yet. But when I disappear for a few weeks, you'll probably know why. So, a few things that I'm going to look through this deep dive, and yes, I'll cover the aurora borealis that many of us have seen over the past couple of nights. I'll also be giving a little look ahead to what we can expect through the rest of autumn and into winter as well. But I thought I needed to talk about Storm Ciarán first. So that was the beast of the storm that came through last week. So here's the satellite and radar imagery from last week, and if I scroll back to the start, let's go through Wednesday evening and you can see the low that is Storm Ciarán that pushed its way in as we went through Wednesday evening and through Thursday. This is the picture at 9 o'clock Wednesday night, and you can see the cloud wrapping around that low. In fact, we did see something of a sting jet develop just to the west of the UK before Ciarán made its way towards the UK. And a sting jet, in case you don't know, can be a relatively short-lived, we're talking 3 to 4 hours, and a relatively small area, a few tens of miles wide, but it's an intense burst of winds. We could see gusts in excess of 100 miles per hour in association with a sting jet, caused by cold air in association with a cold front around a rapidly deepening area of low pressure rushing towards the surface. And as it hits the surface, it brings these strong gusts. Like I said, we did see something like that developing, but fortunately it came before the low reached the UK. So by the time that we saw the low reaching the UK, we did have some very strong winds, but it wasn't a sting jet as such. I will talk about the strength of the winds, where we saw the greatest impacts. You're probably aware the greatest winds were across parts of the Channel Islands and northern France. I'll talk about that in a second, but what you can see is we went through Wednesday night into Thursday. The low pressure that was Ciarán just pushed its way, tracked its way across southern parts of the UK. Now, if you watched my deep dive last week, I talked about the fact that the strongest winds would be on the southern edge of the low, which is why we saw the greatest impacts across the Channel Islands, northern France. And I also talked about the fact that we would see a change in our wind direction as the low tracked across. So if I put rain on now just to show what was happening, but as we went through Wednesday evening, the lows here, the winds going round in an anti-clockwise direction, as we always see in the northern hemisphere. So through the evening and overnight across parts of southwest England, the strongest winds were coming from the southwest. That's why it was across southern coastal parts of Cornwall and Devon that we saw the strongest winds at that point, and some heavy rain then. We saw impacts such as a car being pulled into the sea. Anyway, as the low then pushed its way eastwards, there were two things. Yes, the strongest winds for the UK pushed their way eastwards as well, affecting more southeastern coastal parts of the UK. But also for Devon and Cornwall, like I forecast last week, we saw the winds coming round and they changed direction. So instead they came from the north-northwest. As a result, during the daytime on Thursday, for Devon and Cornwall, the greatest impacts were towards more northern coastal parts. So a slight change there. The other thing that I'll highlight here, if we zoom into the Channel Islands, and I'll just scroll back to around midnight time, and if I zoom in, where's St Helier? Here it is. So here's Jersey, and what you can see is this intense band, this intense zone of rain that pushed its way across as we went through Wednesday night into Thursday. Now, this was actually a supercell. Now, a supercell is an intense storm, usually a thunderstorm, and it was in this instance, caused by rotating updrafts within the storm itself. And this leads to the intense rain that we saw as we went through Wednesday night into Thursday across the Channel Islands. We saw large hail, there was reports of a tornado, and it caused a lot of problems. That then pushed pushed through, and then as we went through the day on Thursday, starting from the early hours, the next band of very intense heavy rain and very strong winds then swept in across parts of the Channel Islands and northern France in particular, where we had some very strong gusts. There was a lot of damage. You've probably seen some of the videos, some of the footage of what happened across parts of northern France and into the Channel Islands. It is worth bearing in mind at this point that Storm Ciarán did unfortunately bring 16 fatalities across parts of Europe, so it was a really damaging storm. As we went through then, the feature did clear away towards the northeast as we went through Thursday, but it was a very wet, windy day for many places. In terms of how impactful it was, and well, it was record-breaking. This time last week I said it was likely to be or going to be a record-breaking in terms of how low the pressure we recorded in England would be. And so yes, it was. We had a new November record for atmospheric pressure recorded in England. It reached 953.3 hectopascals or millibars, depending which one you use, in Plymouth. The previous November record for England was 959.7 back in 1916, so this record had been around for a long time, and this was significantly lower than that. It was also a new November record for Wales with 958.5 in St Athan, and we had some strong gusts. So it wasn't just the fact there was an exceptionally deep area of low pressure, but it was because it was such a deep area of low pressure, we had some very strong winds. Devon, Cornwall and Kent, we recorded gusts around 80 miles per hour. Jersey Met reported gusts in excess of 100 miles per hour, and so it's no wonder that we saw some very damaging conditions across particularly the Channel Islands and northern France. But last week I talked about the uncertainty in the track, and that caused us some headaches in the forecast, and I want to go through that now because this chart, which fellow meteorologist Dan Holly shared something similar to this on his social media, so thank you Dan for the inspiration. But what this chart shows is various models and their forecast track for the low that was Storm Ciarán as it went through Wednesday and into Thursday. Now all these models are taken from midnight Wednesday morning. And what you can see, the red line at the top, that's the GFS, the American model. The brown line, second from top, is ECMWF, the European model. The next line, the blue one, is the Arpège, the French model. Then we have the purple Canadian model. The yellow is ICON, so the German model. And then lastly, it's the green line, that's the Met Office model, followed by the dashed line, which shows the actual track that the low pressure took. And what you can see is, yes, the Met Office model was pretty close, the closest of all these models. It was a little bit further north, but it was by far the closest. Some of the other models, though, were much further north, particularly ECMWF and GFS. And now, again, last week, if you watched my deep dive then, you'll remember me talking about the fact that how low or south the low pressure tracks how north or south the low pressure tracks really was going to play a huge part in where we saw the strongest winds. If the low had been further north and tracked similar to what ECMWF or GFS wanted, we would have seen much stronger winds across southern coastal parts of the UK, whereas because it was further south, even further south than the Met Office model, it was across the Channel Islands and northern France where we saw those gusts in excess of 100 miles per hour. Now, when we were issuing our warnings last week, we did have amber warnings. When we were issuing them, although the Met Office model was pretty accurate, pretty close to the actual track that the low took, we couldn't ignore the model runs, the EC, the GFS ones, that were saying that it could have been further north. So there was the potential there for some very strong winds to affect southern parts of the UK, which is why we had that low likelihood of high impact warning or several warnings out, because that risk was there, which is why we issue those warnings. And so although we didn't see those strongest winds, or those exceptionally strong winds, it was very windy, but not exceptionally windy across southern parts of England in particular. It could have been, and that's why we issued those warnings. And I think this chart shows that very nicely. It also shows just how close the Met Office model was to the actual track. When we do these deep dives, these 10-day trends, and we compare various models, usually the EC, GFS and Met Office models, people often ask which is the better model. And the truthful answer is no individual model is always best. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. And it takes for the meteorologists here at the Met Office to look at the strengths, the weaknesses and the various plots that the models are coming up with to determine what the most likely forecast is going to be. And so it is always worth using the content that we push out on social media and on these YouTube videos as well to get the most likely forecasts when looking, particularly during an event like Storm Ciarán. The other chart that I wanted to show, and if you follow my fellow presenter Ada McGiven on Twitter or X, you may have seen this chart already, but it was the forecast gusts, the strongest gusts that were forecast between 12 p.m. on Wednesday and 12 p.m. on Friday. This was based on using the Met Office model, so based with that global model that was very close to the exact track of the low. But what it did highlight was very strong winds, yes, for Devon and Cornwall and for Kent, less strong winds across more central parts of the southern coast of England, but the strongest winds were further south of the English Channel, northern France and the Channel Islands, which is where we saw the strongest winds. And so this was a pretty accurate chart. You'll see us share similar charts to this going forward because they really do highlight where we're likely to see the strongest gusts. So that's a look at Storm Ciarán, but now let's look ahead to what we can expect through the next few days. And it's fair to say it's going to be a little bit unsettled, quite changeable, but nowhere near the same scale as what we saw last week with Storm Ciarán. I'm going to get rid of the jet stream. Let's put winds and rain on instead of the pressure sequence, and let's zoom in quickly into the UK. And what you can see through Tuesday, area of low pressure over northern parts of Scotland, and around this low, as always, are winds going in an anticyclonic direction. So for much of the UK, they're coming from the northwest or from the west, as we often see at this time of year. And it's because of the direction of the winds that will be determining where we're going to see the focus of the showers. So it's western parts in particular as we go through Tuesday that we're going to see the heaviest and most frequent showers. Yes, some of them will feed further eastwards, but always staying drier towards the east. And the greater chance of some sunshine. But yeah, plenty of showers coming through as we go through Tuesday. Then overnight, Tuesday night into Wednesday, a spell of heavy rain and strong winds, again coming in from the west. So it's western areas that will see the highest rainfall totals. And then all that pushes through as we go through Wednesday. And then behind that, there's more changeable weather to come in all the time coming from the west. So it's always western areas that are going to see the heaviest amount of rainfall. That's not to say eastern areas will be completely dry. They won't be. But it is going to be more business as usual and seeing low pressure systems and our weather coming in from the Atlantic like we normally see at this time of year. Yes, there will be some strong winds, particularly around coastal parts as we go through this week, but it's not going to be on the same scale, not as stormy as last week. So with that in mind, let's look back at what's happened so far this autumn. Now, the chart behind me looks at the rainfall that we've seen so far this autumn compared to the average. Remember, meteorologically, autumn is September, October, November. We're only a few days into November. This has data up to and including the 5th of November, so we're around 73% of the way through the season. And this is comparing what we've seen so far with the average for the whole season. Now, the blues show where it's been wetter than average, the whites show where it's been near to average, although worth bearing in mind that this is comparing the first 73% of the season with the whole season, so even if it's near average, that's really a little bit wetter than average. In the west, we see lots of places drier than average with the browns. The lighter browns, it's between 70 and 90% compared to average. So actually, at this stage in the season, that's pretty close to average. Whereas the darker browns, you can see across western parts of Scotland in particular, we have some dark browns where it's been drier than average. And what this really shows is, yes, eastern parts have been significantly wetter than average so far this season. In the west, it's been quite a bit drier than average for some places. And that's no surprise when we look back at, say, Storm Barbet, which brought a huge amount of rain across particularly eastern parts of Scotland and other places across the UK as well. So it's no surprise that they've been wetter than average. But what I'm saying is we are going to see a change to something a bit more normal as we go through this week, and as much as we're seeing our systems coming in from the west. So these averages, these totals in the west, they are going to increase as we go through the rest of November. So they may become closer to average by the time that we get to the end of the season. So a bit of a change compared to what we've seen so far this autumn. But let's look ahead even further then, and let's have a greater look at what we can expect as we go through the rest of autumn and into winter as well. We are going to see we issue a 3-month contingency planning forecast, which goes out on our website, which you can view if you'd like to. But when we're coming up with that, it's not a forecast, it's a planning outlook. In as much as it looks at bigger pictures and it looks at what's going on around the world, teleconnections, to determine the most likely outcome for the UK. It just gives percentage chances of various things being wetter than average or drier or colder or warmer, etc. And there are various things that we look at. Now, we've already talked at great length about the fact that we're in a strong El Nino at the moment, and that impacts the weather in the UK. Often we see wet and windy start or end to autumn, start to winter, but then which we've already seen. If you look at the fact that we've had several storms already this storm season, we're up to named 3 already, it has been pretty unsettled to end autumn and as we go or look towards the beginning of winter. Strong El Nino often then also leads to a drier but colder end to winter. It's no guarantee, not definitely going to happen, but that is what we often see in a strong El Nino, which we have at the moment. The other thing that we can look at, we are in an easterly phase of the quasi-biennial oscillation, which looks at the winds in the stratosphere above the equator. And now they alternate between going from a westerly to an easterly roughly every 14 months or so. At the moment, we're in an easterly phase, and as those easterly winds come down towards the surface, that often leads to reduction in westerly winds, like we've got through this week, across parts of the UK. So we may see that westerly flow, those westerly winds, becoming less of a thing as we go through the rest of the next few months. But what we also need to look at is the positive Indian Ocean dipole. So that looks at the sea surface temperature anomaly in the western Indian Ocean, and at the moment that's above average, so it's positive, the dipole, and that actually often leads to an increased chance of southwesterly winds, and so we're more likely to see some unsettled changeable weather across southwesterly parts. So let's look at the detail in the forecast, or the outlook, sorry. It's not really a forecast, like I said, because we try not to give too many details. But let's look at the what we can expect as a bigger picture then. And what we're suggesting is that there's a lower than average pressure across parts of the south and southwest is more likely. It's no guarantee, but it's more likely that we'll see that. We've already seen that so far this November, because it's, we had a storm in just the first few days and it tracked across the south. So far, the 3-month outlook, November, December, January, is going pretty much to plan. Meanwhile, across the northeast, above average pressure is more likely. Again, no guarantee, but it's more likely. So with that, through the next 3 months, you'd expect unsettled weather, particularly towards the south-southwest. Towards the northeast, it's likely to be a bit dry, a bit calmer, but that high pressure towards the northeast could drag in some cold air from Europe or Scandinavia via Europe, and so it could lead to some wintry weather for some of us. So we need to pay attention to that. The other thing to highlight in this planning outlook is the fact that we're suggesting that the chance of cold conditions, whilst it's only going to be near typical, it's actually going to be a bit higher than it has been over recent years. We haven't had any major cold spells over recent years, and so the chance of us seeing one through this coming winter is higher than it has been recently. So it's, again, no guarantee, but we just need to bear that in mind. So whilst it's nothing unusual compared to average, it just might be a bit colder than we've seen through some recent years. So I hope that's useful. A little look ahead to what we might expect through the next few months. And then let's have a little look back again. Over recent nights, many of us have managed to see the northern lights, the aurora borealis. It's been viewable across, well, pretty much all of the UK. We've seen reports of it even as far south as Kent. And it's this footage that was taken by Paul Clark in the Yorkshire Dales that I really liked. It was taken on Sunday night, so bonfire night. And what you can see in the bottom left corner are the fireworks, the bonfires that were kicking off, and as people marked bonfire night. But it was what was going on higher up in the sky that I really think was more impressive, more spectacular. The northern lights lighting up, giving a beautiful display. It's on my bucket list for something to see. I've never been able to view it with my own eyes just yet, but I hope to someday soon. And really, it does look stunning. Now, imagery like this across parts of the UK, it's happened before. It's quite rare though, but it has happened before. What is perhaps a little bit more rare is this feature, this strip of light that was viewed, this image from Julie Johnston in Northumberland. And this strip of light is actually called a steve, and it's a strong thermal emission velocity enhancement. That's quite a mouthful. And what it actually is a ribbon of plasma high up, about 450 kilometres up. It's about 25 kilometres wide, but this ribbon of hot plasma is fast moving, and that's what you can see in this strip of light. Now, this is pretty rare to see it in the UK. More common in Canada, which is where it was named. And so this footage is pretty impressive, and it goes often alongside its cousin, the aurora borealis, which you can just about make out in the background as well. But this was a lovely photo, and several reports of people seeing a Steve on Sunday night in particular. But that's everything that I have to go through today. I do hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. We will be back again next week. More likely that it will be recorded on Tuesday next week. Remember, as always, like I said at the start, if you could hit the like button so we know you've enjoyed this content, we'd really appreciate it. Remember to press subscribe so you always stay up to date with everything that we're putting out on YouTube. You can leave a comment. I will be going through them later, assuming my wife's not had a baby. And also, if there's anything that I've spoken about today which you think your friends or family would be interested in, then you can also share this. I'll be back soon, maybe. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely day. Bye-bye.